I'm Mark, a 42-year-old single dad raising two amazing kids in a world where my own parents treat us like we don't exist. At dinner, they took my brother's kids' orders like royalty, but ignored mine completely. That night, I recorded everything, and when my daughter cried, I hit play at the table. That's when everything changed. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had become a ritual. Not one I enjoyed, but one I endured. The kind where you plaster a smile across your face because it's easier than starting a fight in front of your kids. That evening, the house smelled of rosemary and garlic, and my mother's voice echoed from the kitchen, orchestrating everything with the precision of a general. The dining room looked immaculate as always. Silver-polished wine glasses, spotless candles flickering gently against the evening sun filtering through the tall windows of their Charleston estate. Emily clung to my hand a little tighter as we walked through the front door. Ethan, always more eager, darted ahead and ran straight to the sitting room where his cousins were already buried in their iPads. My mother greeted us with a quick glance over her shoulder. Her lips formed a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're here. Good. Dinner's almost ready," she said before turning back to the oven. David strolled in a minute later with Laura trailing behind him, perfectly styled and perfumed, carrying herself like the lady of the manor. Ryan and Chloe barely looked up from their screens. We all gathered at the dining table shortly after. A large roast sat in the center, flanked by a dozen side dishes. My father, Charles, took his seat at the head of the table like a king presiding over his court. He nodded at me briefly, more acknowledgement than welcome. "All right, let's get started," my mother announced, smoothing her apron as she hovered near the table. "Ryan, honey, what would you like? We have roast beef, lemon chicken, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, and those little dinner rolls you like." Ryan shrugged. "Mac and cheese, and I want only white meat on the chicken." "Of course, darling," she said, already moving to plate his request. "And for you, Chloe, can I have the beef, no gravy, and only the center slices, not the end?" "Absolutely, sweetheart." My mother made her way around the table like a waitress at a five-star restaurant. When she got to Emily and Ethan, she didn't even pause. "You two can just have what the adults are having," she said, her eyes already scanning the dessert options on the counter behind me. Emily's smile faded almost instantly. She looked down at her plate. Ethan blinked confused, then smiled anyway. He always tried. I gently cleared my throat. "Actually, Mom, Emily really likes the mac and cheese too, and Ethan." "They're fine," Mark, my father, interrupted, not looking up from his plate. "Let's not complicate dinner with special requests." I bit my tongue. The food was passed around. Ryan complained that his chicken was touching the potatoes. Chloe sent her plate back twice until the slices were just right. Emily sat silently nibbling at the dry edge of roast beef. Ethan picked at the vegetables without complaint. David launched into a story about his latest client at the investment firm, something about closing a deal worth 7 figures. My parents listened with rapt attention, occasionally chiming in with admiration. I tried to join the conversation, once mentioning a science fair at my school where one of my students had built a solar-powered water filter. My mother nodded distractedly, already turning back to ask Ryan how his baseball practice was going. I could feel the warmth drain from my face. I looked at my kids again. Emily's shoulders were hunched. Ethan had started folding his napkin into shapes. I reached under the table and gave her hand a squeeze. She looked up and tried to smile. I smiled back, but something inside me ached. After dessert was served, a lemon tart Chloe claimed was too sour and Ryan didn't even touch. We helped clear the table. Or rather, I did. David and Laura excused themselves early. My parents didn't notice when Ethan dropped his fork or when Emily stood quietly at the sink waiting to help. As I rinsed the plates, my mother came up behind me. "You should really talk to David," she said. "He's doing so well." Maybe he could help you find something more stable. I blinked at her. I'm a teacher, Mom. I've been at the same school for 12 years. Yes, well, teaching's fine, but David's made something of himself, and the kids could benefit from more. I didn't respond. I finished drying the plates, gathered Emily and Ethan, and walked them to the car in silence. It wasn't until I started the engine that Emily finally spoke. Did we do something wrong, Dad? No, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Then why don't they talk to us? Why don't they ask what we want? I reached for her hand again. I didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense to a 10-year-old. Not one that made sense to me either. Ethan leaned forward from the back seat. Dad, can we get pancakes on the way home? Sure, buddy. He smiled. Emily rested her head against the window. The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet where you're too tired to even fill the silence with music. I looked at them in the rearview mirror. My children, my world, and I wondered how many more dinners I could sit through before I stopped pretending everything was fine. The next morning, I woke up before the kids made myself coffee and stood in the kitchen with the blinds drawn halfway open. The sunlight spilled across the floor and the quiet felt heavier than usual. I kept thinking about Emily's question still ringing in my head like a soft echo. Why don't they ask what we want? I took a sip and closed my eyes, and just like that I was 12 again, standing in that same Charleston house, a different version of it. The carpets newer, the walls painted pale yellow. David had just gotten a new 10-speed bike for his birthday. It was shiny red with a black leather seat and chrome handlebars. I remember standing on the porch watching him ride in circles around the driveway while my mother clapped from the front steps and my dad stood with his arms folded, nodding in approval. I had asked for a telescope that year. I loved the stars, still do. I didn't get it. Instead, I got a book about constellations and a pat on the back. I remember my father saying books build character. Bikes build bruises. David wrecked that bike a week later and they bought him another one. It was always like that. My brother, the golden boy, tall, athletic, charming. He went to college in New York with money Dad pulled from an old investment. I got into the same school on scholarship but stayed local because Mom said it would be better for the family if I didn't leave. I worked 2 part-time jobs during college while David studied abroad in Paris. He called home once a week. Mom would put him on speaker and beam like she was talking to a celebrity. When I came home from a night shift at the bookstore, she barely looked up from her knitting. I graduated early, became a teacher, moved into a modest apartment, paid off my loans on my own. David went into finance. Dad gave him a down payment on a condo in Atlanta and a spot at his friend's firm. I visited them once during those early years. David was hosting a cocktail party. Everyone there looked like they'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine. He introduced me as his little brother, the science nerd who teaches high school. People smiled politely and moved on. My mother pulled me aside later that night and whispered, maybe next time wear a sport coat instead of flannel, Mark. You don't want people thinking you're from the maintenance team. I never went back. I opened my eyes. The coffee had gone cold. I set the mug down and ran a hand through my hair. The memories felt as sharp and fresh as yesterday. I didn't think about them often, not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd learned how to store them neatly away from where they could sting. But last night had opened the drawer. Watching my kids get ignored in the exact same house at the exact same table by the exact same people who'd spent my entire life making me feel like an afterthought. It was like watching history repeat itself on a loop. I walked to the living room and saw Emily curled up on the couch, with the book legs tucked under her like a cat. Ethan was still asleep upstairs. I sat beside her and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. You okay, kiddo? She nodded without looking up. You want to talk about last night? She shrugged. You know, sometimes grown-ups don't realize how their actions come across. It's not that they don't love you. Sometimes they're just not very good at showing it. She looked at me, then her eyes quiet but heavy. But they always ask Ryan and Chloe. They always laugh at their stories. Grandma even put whipped cream on Chloe's pie, and she didn't even ask me if I wanted any. I know. I'm sorry. Why don't they like us? It took everything in me not to crumble right there. I reached for her hand. There is nothing wrong with you or your brother. You are smart and kind and everything I could ever hope for. Sometimes people have favorites and they don't even realize how much they're hurting others. But I see you. I hear you. And I love you exactly the way you are. She nodded again quietly. Later that afternoon, we went for a walk around Colonial Lake. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of salt from the harbor. Ethan skipped ahead, picking up acorns and showing them to passing ducks. Emily stayed close, her hand occasionally brushing mine. We passed an elderly couple on a bench feeding pigeons. The woman looked up and smiled. Your daughter has your eyes, I smiled back. Thank you. She gets her stubbornness from her mom, though. It was a half joke, but I could feel the truth of it settle in my chest. Sarah and I had tried, but life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. She was a good mother, still is, but the weight of balancing a teaching career, 2 kids, and a divorce had left me worn. I'd always wanted to believe I could give my children what I never had. Last night proved I was still failing at that. After dinner, once the kids were in bed, I pulled out an old box from my closet. Inside were photographs, school awards, report cards. One picture showed me and David as kids side by side in front of the fireplace. He had a new football. I held a wrapped book. We were both smiling, but my eyes looked toward the floor. I flipped through the rest quickly and then paused at a faded note tucked in the back. It was a card from a teacher in high school, Mrs. Perry. She had written, "Never stop questioning the world around you. The ones who ask why are the ones who change everything." I sat on the edge of my bed holding that card, thinking about what it meant to be seen, to be valued. Not just by strangers, but by the people who are supposed to love you first. And then I thought about my kids, about Emily's eyes at dinner, Ethan's quiet confusion, and something inside me shifted. Not all at once, but just enough to know that the next Sunday dinner couldn't be the same. Not if I wanted to break the cycle. That week the weather turned gray and wet. Charleston's streets were soaked in a constant drizzle and everything felt slower. Mornings came later. Nights settled in faster, and even the kids moved like they were walking through fog. I picked them up from school on Thursday, the air thick with that heavy, humid rain that never quite becomes a storm. Ethan was talking about frogs again. He was convinced there was one living under the steps at school, and he planned to rescue it the next day with an old yogurt cup. Emily sat quietly beside him in the back seat, head turned toward the window, watching the raindrops slide across the glass like they were racing. We turned onto Rutledge Avenue, almost home, when her voice came out soft. "Did we do something wrong, Dad?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes on the road. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why does Grandma only care about Ryan and Chloe? Why do they always get special food and we don't?" I swallowed hard. The windshield wipers kept their rhythm, and for a moment I just focused on that. "I wish I knew. I really do. But it's not your fault. None of it is." She didn't say anything else, just turned back to the window and rested her head on the glass. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat on the couch with my laptop trying to zone out. The TV was on mute, the glow lighting up the room just enough to make the silence feel less sharp. I clicked through emails, most of them junk, until one subject line stopped me. Congratulations to our 2024 Excellence in Education honorees. I almost deleted it, thinking it was another mass newsletter from the state board, but something made me open it. Her name was third on the list, Rebecca Green, Magnolia High School Outstanding STEM Educator. I stared at it for a long time before I clicked the link attached. It opened a video. A ballroom crowded with teachers and administrators, a woman at the podium smiling wide. Rebecca. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. She looked older now, sure, but still had that same fire in her eyes she always had in class. She started thanking people, her colleagues, her students, her late father. And then her voice caught for a second. And most of all, I want to thank the person who made me believe I could actually be good at science. Mr. Sullivan, my 10th grade physics teacher who used to let me redo every lab until I understood what I was doing. Who stayed after school with me 3 days a week, even when he had his own family to get home to. He probably thought I didn't notice how tired he looked, but I did, and I never forgot it. I paused the video. My hands were trembling a little. I remembered her. She had a hard time with formulas at first, struggled with momentum and vectors, but she worked harder than anyone else. She always asked questions, even the ones the other kids thought were stupid. And I remember telling her once that curiosity was more valuable than any test score. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes. The memory wasn't one I had been clinging to. It was just there, buried somewhere beneath the paperwork and routines of daily life. But now it rose clear and undeniable. Someone had remembered. Someone had seen me. The next morning, I showed Emily the video over breakfast. She had a mouthful of cereal and blinked at the screen while it played. "That's your student, yeah. From a long time ago." She looked at me sideways. "So, you were her favorite teacher, I guess so." She grinned, and for the first time in days, her face lit up the way it used to. "Cool." Later that day, I got a call from Principal Harris. One of our juniors had placed first in a regional robotics competition. There was talk of a local news piece. Nothing big, but still it made me smile. For a moment, it felt like the world outside my family still saw value in me, even if my parents didn't. I stopped by the teacher's lounge that afternoon and pulled Rebecca's speech up again on my phone. A few other teachers gathered around. They remembered her too. "You taught Rebecca Green," one of them asked. "She was one of the best. You're part of that award," Mark, another said. I shrugged it off, but inside, something was shifting. Like a wheel turning slowly back into motion. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. Emily and Ethan were chasing fireflies in the front yard. Their laughter echoed between the houses. For a brief moment, the ache in my chest loosened its grip. Maybe I couldn't fix my parents. Maybe I couldn't rewrite the childhood I had, but I had raised two amazing kids. And somewhere out there, one of my old students had remembered me not just as a teacher, but as someone who gave her permission to believe in herself. That had to mean something. The fireflies blinked in the dusk. Ethan squealed and held up his hands in triumph, a tiny jar lit with golden flickers. Emily ran to me, cheeks pink, hair flying wild. "Dad, look, he actually caught one," I laughed and stood to meet them on the steps. "All right, firefly champions, time to wash up and get ready for bed." As they bounded inside, still laughing, I stayed behind for one more breath of the warm evening air. Maybe it was time to stop looking for validation in a house that never gave it. Maybe it was time to look at what I had built on my own. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start drawing some lines. The community center off Westwood Avenue was crowded that Saturday. Parents mingled near the registration table while kids rushed toward the gym, their sneakers squeaking across the polished floor. Ethan had signed up for an afternoon robotics class, and Emily had chosen painting. I stood between their two classrooms holding their coats and backpacks like a walking storage unit when I saw her. Sarah was leaning against the far wall, scrolling through her phone, looking almost the same as the last time we talked face to face. Her dark hair was shorter now, her blazer slightly more fitted, but her posture was exactly the same. Confident, composed, tired in that quiet way you only notice when you've known someone well. She looked up, met my eyes, and for a second we just stood there. No tension, no awkwardness, just recognition. "Hey," she said, pushing off the wall. "Hey," I replied. Ethan came running past us, yelling he'd be the first one to build a rocket launcher, and Sarah smiled. He's still obsessed with building things. Still, never stopped. Now he wants to be an engineer. Good. He always had that look in his eye. The same one you used to get when you'd spend all night fixing the dishwasher just so you wouldn't call a plumber. We laughed. It felt easy, unexpectedly easy. "Emily's class is at the end of the hall," I said. "I'll walk with you." We passed the classroom windows, little kids already elbow-deep in paint and glitter. Sarah nodded toward the last door. "I've got a student here, too. One of my interns is teaching today. I came to check in, maybe steal a few ideas. How's the clinic? Busy, underfunded, but we're getting there." We stood near the vending machines. The hum of fluorescent lights and distant laughter made the silence between us feel soft, not strained. "You look tired, Mark." I laughed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Is that your subtle way of saying I need to take better care of myself?" "No. It's my not-so-subtle way of saying I know that look. And I remember what it usually means." I didn't answer right away. "It's them, my parents, the Sunday dinners. You know how it's always been, but lately, it's starting to get to the kids." Emily asked me if they'd done something wrong. That hit me harder than anything. Sarah's expression didn't change. Just a slight nod, like she'd been expecting this conversation for years. "You remember when we first split, when we had nothing figured out? And I asked if your dad could help with that deposit on the apartment near the school, yeah? You told me he said no, that if a man couldn't provide for his family without handouts, he wasn't a real man. I did. He said that to my face. I never forgot that, not because it hurt me, but because I saw what it did to you. You swallowed it and kept pushing forward. You didn't ask him again, even when we were drowning." She paused, watching a toddler drop a juice box. "I know they're your family. I know it's complicated. But Mark, that man made you feel small your whole life. And now he's doing it to your kids. That's not just complicated, that's toxic." I looked down at the floor, the faded tiles, the small cracks in the grout. "They're still my parents. I know, but being related doesn't give someone the right to hurt you. And if they keep hurting Emily and Ethan, you have to ask yourself what loyalty really means." There was a long pause. "You think I should cut them off? I think you should stop pretending they'll change. And I think you should stop letting your kids believe they're the problem." Her words settled over me like dust, not heavy but impossible to ignore. Ethan came running up, then holding a robot made from old Legos and a juice bottle. "Dad, look, it moves." I smiled and crouched down. "That's awesome, buddy. Did you build it yourself?" "Mostly. My teacher helped with the wires. You proud of yourself?" He grinned, super proud. Sarah knelt beside me and looked him in the eye. "You did a great job, Ethan. Thanks, Mom." We stood up. She brushed her hands on her jeans. "All right, I've got to run, but Mark, just think about what I said. Okay, I will." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I've always thought you were the strongest person I knew. Not because you never needed help, but because you kept going even when no one offered it." She walked away, and I stood there for a while watching Ethan tap buttons on his new robot. Emily joined us a minute later, her fingers stained with green paint, a tiny flower painted on her cheek. "Can we get ice cream?" "Sure. Why not?" The three of us walked to the car. The clouds had started to break. Sunlight spilled across the parking lot in soft gold streaks. I drove with the windows down, the wind rushing in, the kids singing along to some pop song on the radio. I kept thinking about what Sarah said. Maybe it wasn't about cutting people off. Maybe it was about recognizing who was holding the scissors. The next Tuesday afternoon, I found myself pulling into a small brick office tucked between a dental clinic and a florist on Broad Street. A brass plaque on the door read, "Torres and Linden Law." I hadn't been here in years, not since my mother dragged me along for a will signing I wasn't supposed to understand. But I remembered the place, the heavy oak door, the worn carpet inside that smelled faintly of lemon oil and thyme. I didn't have an appointment. I just showed up. Something about Sarah's words had stuck rattling around in my chest like a loose coin. If I couldn't confront my father head-on, maybe I could at least understand what he'd already decided behind my back. The receptionist gave me a polite smile and said Mr. Torres was in. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in his office across from a desk that hadn't moved an inch since the early 90s. "Mark Sullivan, haven't seen you since you were knee-high," Alex said, extending a warm hand. His grip was still firm, but his knuckles were spotted and his white mustache twitched when he smiled. "Good to see you again, Mr. Torres. Please, call me Alex." "What brings you here, son?" I hesitated for a second. Then I said it. "I want to talk about my father's estate planning." That smile didn't falter, but his eyebrows rose slightly. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "You know I can't share client information without consent, Mark. Attorney-client privilege. I'm not asking for details, I just want to know if I'm crazy. If it's all in my head that he's set everything up for David and left me out of it entirely." Alex studied me for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the filing cabinet behind him, and pulled out a thick folder. "I'm not going to break any rules here," he said. "But I can tell you this. Your father first came to me when you were still in high school. Back then his plans were simple. A joint inheritance evenly split between both sons. No conditions, just a standard will." I nodded slowly. That sounded like something that might have existed once. Long before David got his first corner office and I became the family footnote. But about 10 years ago he came back, with a different tone. He said David was showing strong leadership potential, that you were still figuring things out. I swallowed. "I remember pushing back," Alex continued. "I said you were a good man, steady, honest. That teaching wasn't a sign of failure." He didn't argue, just said it was his right to reward ambition. He closed the file and looked directly at me. "Mark, your father's current will leaves almost everything to David. The business shares, the lake house, even the art collection. You get a single trust for the kids' education, that's it." It hit me like a slow-moving train. Not shocking, but still crushing. So I was right. You were. And I'll tell you something else. I've drafted hundreds of wills in my time. Most of them are fair. Some are foolish. But the ones that sting the worst are the ones that reinforce old wounds. I didn't realize I'd been gripping the edge of the chair until my fingers started to ache. I released them and let out a long breath. If I wanted to challenge it someday, is that even possible? It depends. You'd need to prove undue influence or lack of capacity or some failure to meet legal standards. Not easy, especially in South Carolina. But not impossible. Alex reached for a notepad and scribbled something down. I can't advise you formally unless you retain me, but if you ever decide to take a closer look, I can help connect you with someone who specializes in estate litigation. Off the record, of course. Thanks. I appreciate that. He slid the note across the desk and leaned back again. You're not crazy, Mark. You're just in a family that forgot what fairness looks like. I left the office feeling like I'd stepped out of a fog. The air outside was cool, the sun tucked low behind clouds, but I felt clearer than I had in weeks. On the way home, I stopped by a bookstore and picked up a new copy of The Little Prince for Emily. Her old one had water damage from a juice spill last spring, and I knew she still missed it. I also grabbed a simple stem kit for Ethan, one of those make-your-own motor things with wires and switches. When I got home, they were both in the living room, sprawled across the floor like starfish halfway through a puzzle. I dropped the books beside them. Surprised, they lit up instantly. I knew it wouldn't fix anything permanent. It wouldn't erase dinners filled with silence or years of second place. But it was a start. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the notepad Alex had given me. I read the name twice. David Glasser, Estate Litigator, Columbia, SC. I didn't call. Not yet. But I kept the number. Folded it into my wallet, because even if I never used it, I knew now that I wasn't imagining things. And maybe for the first time I had something resembling a choice. Friday morning started like any other. Ethan spilled orange juice on his math homework. Emily couldn't find the matching sock to her favorite pair. We were 10 minutes late getting out the door, and by the time we hit the traffic light near King Street, the kids were already bickering over which playlist to use for the drive. But there was something off about Emily. She was quieter than usual. Her answers came slower, shorter. At first I chalked it up to sleepiness, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I caught her looking out the window with that expression she used to wear after dentist appointments. Not sad, just distant. I dropped them off, gave my usual wave to Mrs. Henderson by the car line, and headed to work. Second period was planning, but I couldn't focus on lesson plans. Something about Emily's face stuck with me. At lunch, I texted her, "Hope you're having a good day. Love you." She didn't reply. When I picked them up that afternoon, Ethan launched into a story about how he built a tower of erasers taller than his water bottle. Emily sat beside him in silence, backpack clutched in her lap. "You okay, Em?" "Yeah, just tired." "You sure?" She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. At home, she went straight to her room. I let it go. Some days needed space more than questions. Ethan, oblivious, dragged me into the backyard to show off the spaceship he built from old cardboard boxes. An hour later, while folding laundry in the hallway, I heard her door creak open. I peeked in. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, organizing her shoes. "Hey, kiddo, want a snack?" She shrugged, then paused. "Dad, do you think my shoes are ugly?" "What, no?" "Why would you think that?" "Some girls at school today said they look cheap, that they're knockoffs. They asked if I ever shop at the mall or if all my clothes come from discount stores." My heart sank. "And Chloe was with them," she added quietly. She didn't say anything, but she laughed a little. I knelt beside her. "Emily, listen to me. Your clothes don't define you. Those girls are wrong. And Chloe, she should have stood up for you." "It's fine," she said too quickly. "I'm used to it. I don't care," but I could see in her hands, clenched tight around the laces of her sneakers, that she did care. That it stung deeper than she wanted to admit. I didn't push, just reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "You want to talk about it more later, maybe?" We had dinner, simple spaghetti and frozen garlic bread. Ethan talked non-stop about space camp brochures they handed out at school. Emily barely touched her plate. After the dishes were done and the kids were getting ready for bed, Ethan wandered into the kitchen where I was wiping the counters. "Dad, yeah, buddy, how come Grandma and Grandpa never ask what I like to eat?" The sponge in my hand stopped mid-wipe. "What do you mean, like?" "They always ask Ryan if he wants ketchup or barbecue sauce, and they ask Chloe if she wants milk or juice. But nobody asks me. Grandma just puts broccoli on my plate and says it's healthy." I crouched down. "Does that bother you?" He thought for a second. "I don't know. I guess. Sometimes I just wish they'd ask." I hugged him, tight, maybe tighter than I should have. He patted my back like he thought I might need comforting more than he did. After I tucked them in and turned off the lights, I walked back to the car. I don't even know why. I just needed space. Silence. Somewhere to sit that wasn't filled with drawings on the fridge or toys on the floor or memories in the walls. I climbed into the driver's seat and shut the door. The dome light clicked off. Everything went black, and I cried. Not loud, not shaking, just quiet, steady tears that slid down my face like they'd been waiting there for years. All this time I'd tried to shield them, to make sure they felt loved and seen and whole. And still my parents had found a way to make them feel less. Just like they'd done to me. I sat there for what felt like hours, the night pressing in around me. When I finally stepped out of the car, I wasn't lighter, but something in me had settled. Enough was enough. 2 weeks later, I received the invitation in the mail. Heavy cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering, a small gold seal in the corner. It felt like something out of another world, the kind of thing that showed up in the lives of other people. People with connections, with stories worth celebrating. The envelope read, "Honoring educators who changed lives." Inside, a formal letter signed by Rebecca Green, now a celebrated education policy advisor in Washington. My former student, the one who used to stay after class every Tuesday just to ask more questions about gravity and thermodynamics. The girl who once told me her parents didn't believe girls belonged in science, and who went on to graduate top of her class at Stanford. She was hosting the event in Charleston at a private banquet hall near the waterfront. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, but she'd remembered me. "Dad, are you gonna go?" Emily asked that evening, holding the invitation like it was made of glass. "I think I should." Ethan peeked over her shoulder. "Is there free food?" "Probably." "Then I vote yes." The night of the event, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my tie for the 5th time. Emily walked in holding my jacket. "You look nice, thanks, sweetheart." She reached up and fixed my collar. "You deserve this." Her words landed somewhere deep, somewhere I hadn't let anyone touch in years. The banquet hall was bright, filled with round tables and laughter. I recognized a few old colleagues, but most faces were strangers. I kept my head down until I heard my name announced from the stage. Rebecca stood there in a navy dress holding a microphone with practiced ease. There's a moment in every student's life when someone believes in them before they believe in themselves. For me, that person was Mr. Sullivan. Applause. He stayed after school to help me build a science fair project when I was too scared to go home. He told me I could change the world even when I didn't think I could pass algebra. Tonight, I honor the man who taught me that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. I felt my throat close as I walked to the stage. Every step felt unreal. She handed me the mic, smiling. I looked out at the crowd, a sea of faces waiting, expectant. "I'm not used to this," I said. "I usually stand in front of teenagers, which is intimidating in its own right. But this is different." Laughter. I became a teacher because I believed knowledge was power. But the older I get, the more I realize kindness is power too. Seeing someone, listening, that's what we remember. That's what changes lives. I paused, took a breath. Rebecca, thank you for this. And to every student who ever doubted themselves, just know, someone out there believes in you. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's yourself. Either way, don't stop moving forward. The applause was thunderous. Someone in the front row stood, then another, a standing ovation. Afterward, Rebecca found me near the refreshment table. You haven't changed a bit, she said. You've changed a lot. For the better. She smiled. You still teaching at Ridgeview? Yep. 10th grade physics. Every year they get taller and I stay the same height. We laughed. Seriously though, thank you. I meant every word. I know you did, and I needed to hear it more than you know. The next morning I made pancakes. The kind with chocolate chips the way Emily liked. Ethan built a syrup tower and declared himself breakfast king. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a link from a colleague at school. Hey, Mark, you're famous confused? I clicked. The video of my speech had gone online. Rebecca's media team posted it, and within hours it had picked up steam. Thousands of shares. Comments from teachers across the country, parents, former students. One read, "We need more teachers like Mr. Sullivan." Another, "This brought me to tears. Thank you, sir." I sat on the couch, stunned. The kids leaned over my shoulder. "Is that you?" Emily whispered. "It's him," Ethan said proudly. "Our dad's on the internet." I smiled, but inside I felt something shift. The recognition didn't change who I was, but it reminded me that outside of my father's narrow world I mattered, that my choices had impact, that I was not invisible. That afternoon, while folding laundry, my mother called. "Mark, your father and I saw the video." I waited. "We didn't know people thought so highly of you." I didn't respond. He was surprised. Still, I said nothing. "We're having dinner this Sunday, just family. If the kids want to come." "I'll think about it." "All right, just let us know." When she hung up, I sat for a long time holding one of Ethan's tiny socks in my hand. For the first time they had reached out, not with warmth, but with curiosity. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a crack, and light always finds its way through the cracks. Sunday came with its usual rituals. The kids cleaned up without being asked. I ironed my shirt like it was something important. We got into the car, same route, same driveway, same polished brick facade, staring back like it had all the answers. I had the recorder in my pocket. A small silver thing I used once in class for parent-teacher meetings. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. I didn't tell the kids. I didn't want them to carry the weight of expectation. This was for me, for proof, for clarity. Inside, everything smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken. Margaret was setting the table. Charles was in his recliner flipping through the newspaper, even though he'd probably already read it 3 times. David and Laura were already there, Ryan and Chloe on their phones at the dining table like royalty awaiting service. "Hey, Mark," David said with a nod already halfway through a glass of wine. "Hi," I replied, helping Emily and Ethan out of their coats. Dinner started like always, formal, structured. Conversation aimed mostly at David, circling back to some promotion he might get at the firm. Charles grunted approvingly, and Margaret kept refilling his glass like it was sacred. Then the food talk began. "Chloe, darling, would you prefer the honey-glazed carrots or the garlic butter ones?" "Garlic," she replied without looking up. "And Ryan, do you still love the mac and cheese with truffle oil?" Ryan shrugged. "Yeah, sure." Margaret beamed. She turned to Laura. Can you help me plate theirs first? I want everything just right. I waited, watched, like I was studying weather patterns before a storm. Then came the silence. She passed by Emily and Ethan with nothing but a glance. I cleared my throat. What about them? Margaret paused, blinking like I'd spoken another language. Oh, just give them what we're having. Kids are too picky these days anyway. Emily looked down at her lap. Ethan tried to smile and failed. I felt my hand move before I could think. I reached into my pocket, placed the recorder in the middle of the table, and pressed play. The table fell silent. The device clicked to life. Static. Then my voice from last dinner. Margaret, what would Chloe like? Oh, she prefers apple slices to salad. Charles Ryan won't eat if it's not crispy. Make sure it's crispy. Then silence. Then Margaret's voice again. The other two. Just give them what we're having. They'll manage. Then laughter. Then Charles, you know the real grandkids are those two. The recorder clicked off. Emily had tears in her eyes. Ethan looked at me, unsure if he should be afraid or proud. What is this? Charles barked. It's what you said, what you always say. You think they don't notice. You think your favoritism is invisible. David set down his fork slowly. Mark, come on. That's not fair. Isn't it? I asked. Because it's been going on since we were kids. You always got the new bike. The praise, the help. I got lectures in silence. And now it's repeating, right in front of my kids. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. You don't have to like me, I said, but you will respect my children, or you will not see them again. Charles pushed back from the table. That's dramatic. No, I said calmly. That's a boundary, one I should have drawn years ago. Emily stood shaky but firm. Ethan followed her. I picked up the recorder. We're leaving. David stood too. Mark, don't do this. Let's just know. Laura looked down at her plate, frozen. I turned to Margaret. You once told me real men don't ask for help, but maybe real men speak up when they see people they love being hurt. So here I am. We walked out. The door closed behind us without a word. In the car, no one spoke for the first few blocks. Then Emily whispered, Thank you. I reached for her hand, always. The city lights blurred past as we drove home. Something had shifted. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full of possibility, of healing, of something new. The first week after we walked out, the phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts. Not from Margaret, not from Charles, not even David. At first I thought it might hurt more, but instead it felt like air rushing into lungs that had been tight for years. We filled our time. I signed Emily up for her first art class at the local community center. Ethan joined a youth science club that met every Saturday. We spent weekends building rockets, hiking at Caw Caw Interpretive Center, and eating pancakes at the corner diner without dressing up for anyone. At night, the house felt warmer, even without new insulation. Sarah came by one afternoon to drop off some school paperwork. She stood in the kitchen sipping coffee like she used to, and looked at me with a small smile. You look less tense, she said. I raised an eyebrow. That's a compliment. Thanks, I said, sitting across from her. The kids are thriving. It's amazing what a little peace can do. She set her mug down. Have you thought any more about the will? Yeah. I spoke with Alex again. He said it's not hopeless. We may have grounds to challenge it, especially with the bias in those recordings. Sarah nodded. You should do it. Not for the money, for the principle, so they don't rewrite the story when you're not around. I watched the kids through the window chasing each other with paper airplanes. You really think it's worth it? I think showing your kids that you stand up for what's right is always worth it. The next day I met with Alex at his office. He had a folder ready for me, thick with notes and legal language. "We'll need to prove undue influence or a pattern of discriminatory behavior," he said. "The recordings help, so does the public reaction." Speaking of which, he slid his tablet across the desk. On the screen was a blog post titled "The Forgotten Son," a teacher's stand for his children. It had already been shared over 15,000 times. "Where did this come from?" "A parent at your school wrote it. One of your students' moms. She was at that educator event, heard your speech. It resonated." I skimmed the post. It told my story, though not by name. A father who'd been dismissed by his own parents, who now raised his kids with compassion and courage. It ended with a simple line. "Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is refuse to stay quiet," Alex continued. "Local papers are picking it up, community groups too. Even your school board chair forwarded it to the superintendent." I sat back stunned. That week I noticed the ripple effects. At the grocery store, someone tapped my shoulder and said, "You're the teacher, right? The one from the article, thank you for standing up." Parents at school sent handwritten notes. Students who barely said hi before now lingered after class to chat. Ethan came home with a drawing a classmate made of Superdad flying over a school with Emily and Ethan on his cape. Then came the unexpected. Alex called me again. "So, Charles's firm." The partners asked him to step back from some of his public engagements. Why they're getting flooded with emails. Apparently the board doesn't love the optics of one of their senior advisors being at the center of a viral favoritism scandal. Someone even organized a petition. I didn't know what to say. "Look, I know you're not doing this for revenge," Alex said. "But sometimes consequences have a funny way of catching up." By the end of the month, I had officially filed the legal notice to contest the will. It wouldn't change everything. It might not change anything legally. But it was a line in the sand. At dinner one night, Ethan asked if we were still going to Grandma and Grandpa's for Thanksgiving. "No, buddy," I said gently. "Why not?" "Because sometimes when people don't treat you with respect, it's okay to step away for a while, even if they're family." He thought for a second, like taking a time out. "Exactly." Emily looked up from her mashed potatoes. "Then I think we should make our own Thanksgiving. Just us, with pie." "Lots of pie," Ethan added. "And chocolate whipped cream," Emily said. "Deal," I smiled. And just like that, something new began. The first signs came like a slow drizzle before a storm. A post on a local community forum questioning my motives. A comment on the article calling me a bitter ex-son looking for a payday. Then a full-blown editorial in the Charleston Business Journal with my name in the headline, "Local Teacher's Family Drama Turns into Legal Power Play." I didn't need a detective to guess who was behind it. David. I hadn't spoken to him since the dinner blow-up, but his fingerprints were all over the sudden media spin. He was using the same tactic he had used since we were kids: reframe, deflect, dominate. The phone rang one afternoon while I was helping Emily with her math homework. It was Alex. "You might want to sit down," he said. "I'm already sitting. I just got word from an old friend who works in PR consulting. Your brother's firm hired a crisis management team. They're coordinating this press strategy to discredit your legal filing." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "So they're trying to paint me as greedy." "Exactly. The angle is that you're trying to punish your parents because you didn't inherit the family assets." It's textbook. I looked at Emily. She was drawing hearts in the margins of her notebook, humming to herself. "What should I do?" Alex was quiet for a second. "Well, sometimes karma doesn't wait for us to act." "What do you mean?" "I've been going through old estate records and email threads from when I was helping Charles with the early trust paperwork. I found something odd, something I never noticed before. You're scaring me. It's an email from David to their family accountant, dated about 6 years ago. It's vague, but it references temporarily reallocating investment reserves to bolster our quarterly optics. In English, Alex, it sounds like David used part of your parents' investment fund to pad his firm's balance sheet, possibly to secure new investors. My stomach turned. Is that illegal? If he did it without disclosure or permission from the trust's other stakeholders, then yes. And if it misled investors, definitely. I sat back, trying to process. Do you still have access to that? I do. And I'm submitting it to the Financial Oversight Board today. I'm also alerting a federal compliance contact I know. They'll start a review. What happens next? If they find credible suspicion, they'll open a formal investigation. And if it moves fast, it might overshadow everything David's trying to do in the press. I exhaled slowly. So you're telling me my brother might have cooked the books with Mom and Dad's retirement money? Alex was silent for a beat. Let's just say the family's golden child may not be as untouchable as he thinks. That night I got a call from David. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, controlled. Mark, this is getting out of hand. You're hurting people. Drop the petition. Let's be adults about this. I deleted it without replying. 3 days later, the Charleston Ledger ran a front-page story, private equity heir under investigation for financial misconduct. No names, but enough detail to make the dots easy to connect. The article mentioned a potential misuse of elder assets, a whistleblower attorney, and a coming federal review. David didn't call again. Neither did Charles. But Margaret did. Her voice was small, tired. Mark, what is happening? I think you should ask David, Mom. We're being hounded by reporters. Your father hasn't slept in 2 days. I didn't say anything. Do you think this is what Rebecca would want you to do? That stopped me cold. What she used your speech to lift people up. And now you're using this attention to tear everything down. I swallowed hard. No, Mom. I'm just done letting people step on me without consequences, including family. The silence stretched. I wish you'd told us how bad it felt, she said finally. I did, for years. You just weren't listening. She hung up without another word. Later that week, Alex called again. The investigation is official now. They'll be reaching out to you for a statement. Will I have to testify? Probably. But they'll handle it professionally. You won't be alone in this. I looked around the living room. Emily's art project drying on the table. Ethan's science book open on the couch. Our life, humble but honest, surrounded me. I'm not scared, I said. Good. Because I think this is just the beginning. The headlines came like aftershocks. Sullivan Holdings names interim CEO. After scandal. Charleston power couple faces backlash after estate bias uncovered. A son's stand spurs legal reform debate. It was surreal watching the legacy my parents had tried so hard to curate unravel in real time. David was officially removed from his position as managing director of Sullivan Holdings. The board issued a carefully worded statement about maintaining ethical standards and preserving investor trust. But behind the scenes, I heard the words that mattered more. Breach, fraud, liability. No one was saying prison yet, but whispers floated in certain circles. Charles and Margaret retreated from public life. Their country club appearances vanished. Margaret declined to host her annual charity luncheon. Charles stopped contributing op-eds to the Business Journal. At school pickup, one of the other parents nodded toward me and whispered to another, "That's him, the teacher from the story." But what mattered more than any of that was what happened at home. Emily had a birthday party that weekend. 10 friends came. She wore a homemade crown and opened a card from her best friend that said, "You're the bravest girl I know." Her smile in that moment was brighter than any spotlight my parents ever chased. Ethan made the finals in his science club's annual invention challenge. He built a basic solar-powered water purifier using recycled plastic and household items. When he stood up in front of the judges, he looked for me, found my eyes, and grinned like nothing in the world could shake him. At night, we made popcorn and watched old cartoons. We built a bookshelf together even though it leaned a little to the left. The house still needed work, and I still couldn't afford spring break vacations like David's family once did. But we had peace and dignity and each other. One afternoon, Alex called. Mark, the judge, issued a ruling on the estate. I braced myself. The will was declared invalid due to prejudicial clauses and lack of consideration for legal heirs. The assets will be redistributed evenly unless a party declines their share. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thanks, Alex, really. You'll get a formal notice soon. There's a lot of paperwork, but this is a win, and not just for you. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat in the quiet living room and looked over the notice again, my name. The amount I stood to inherit, enough to pay off the mortgage, save for college, maybe even buy that little lake house I used to dream about. But something inside me said no. This wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about breaking the cycle, about showing my children that value doesn't come from inheritance or approval, but from integrity. From standing when you're told to sit, from speaking when you're told to stay quiet. The next day I called Alex. "I want to waive my share," I said. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Have it donated to the Community Education Fund. Let it help the next Rebecca Green find her path." He paused, then said, "I think that's exactly what your daughter would have done if she were in your shoes one day." That weekend, I took Emily and Ethan to a food truck fair downtown. We shared a massive funnel cake, played cornhole, and danced badly to a bluegrass band playing near the fountain. At one point, Emily tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, someone from school said you're famous now. Because of the articles." I laughed. "I'm not famous, I just told the truth. And stood up for you two." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's better than being famous." I pulled them both in close. Way better. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a soft lavender, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't looking backward. I wasn't trying to fix what had been broken or rewrite what had been denied. I was here with them. And that was more than enough. The auditorium smelled faintly of waxed floors and coffee from the parent booths. Rows of folding chairs creaked under proud families. Balloons bobbed at the corners of the stage, swaying with each gust of air conditioning. I sat in the middle row, flanked by Sarah and Ethan. My hands pressed together so tightly they ached. Emily stood backstage in a blue dress she had picked herself, her hair pulled back with a white ribbon. Her teacher, Mrs. Callahan, motioned to her and whispered something in her ear. Emily nodded and stepped onto the stage, clutching a note card in one hand. She was the last speaker, the fifth-grade valedictorian. She walked to the podium with the kind of calm I never had at her age. She cleared her throat, once looked out at the sea of faces and found mine. My daughter smiled. "This year," she began, "I learned that sometimes being brave doesn't look like fighting dragons. Sometimes it looks like asking for help, or speaking up when something feels wrong, or forgiving someone who never said sorry." The room was silent. But most of all, I learned that it's okay to want to feel seen. That's not being selfish, that's being human. And I want to thank the person who made sure I never felt invisible again. She paused. My dad. Something caught in my throat. My fingers curled tighter in my lap. He never let me feel small. not even when other people tried to make us feel like we didn't matter. He showed me that love isn't just words or gifts, it's showing up. It's staying. It's choosing your people every day, even when it's hard. Emily looked right at me. So thank you, Dad. I love you. Applause erupted. I stood clapping slowly, then faster, my vision blurred. Ethan tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, barely. After the ceremony, we took pictures near the playground where I used to pick Emily up when she was just starting school. Her hands were sticky from a celebratory cupcake, but she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around my waist and pressed her cheek into my side. "You really meant all that?" I asked, my voice low. She looked up at me serious. "Of course, you never gave up on us." And in that moment I knew. All the courtroom papers, the dinner table silences, the public judgment, the inheritance I walked away from. None of it mattered compared to this. I had broken the cycle. We stopped by the community library on the way home. One of the rooms now bore a small plaque, Green Sullivan Educational Fund. The receptionist smiled as we passed. Behind us, another child sat with her mom reading a book about constellations. It could have been me and Emily years ago. Later that night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat on the back porch and watched the sky go from rose to navy. Fireflies blinked across the yard. The wind carried faint music from a nearby house party. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I felt whole. And I realized something. What I had needed all along wasn't a fortune or a father's praise. It wasn't a seat at the family table or my name in their ledger. It was this, my children knowing they were worthy of love, that they didn't need to earn it, that they never had to shrink themselves to fit into someone else's legacy. That was my legacy. If you've ever been hurt by the people meant to protect you, let me tell you this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You do not have to stay where love is conditional. You have the right to build a home where your heart feels safe, and you can start anytime, even now, because sometimes the family you build is the one that finally saves you. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you real stories that heal, empower, and remind you that you're not alone. Your support helps us keep going.